Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Separating Hype from Reality, the Real Data Behind Marketing and Generative AI, presented by Deloitte Digital and Martech. Before we get started, here are a few viewing tips. If you have any audio issues, go ahead and click that audio icon to enable your audio. If you have any viewing issues, you can use the Q&A section to communicate with us. You can also send questions and comments directly to the speakers about their presentations at any time. Joining us today from Deloitte Digital are Todd Brownrout, Head of Global Content Production, and Jenny Kelly, Head of Content. Thank you both so much for joining us. Todd, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning or good afternoon to you, wherever you are. Glad to be with you today. I'm joined by my colleague, Jenny Kelly. My name is Todd Brownrout, and I do head global content production for Deloitte Digital. And we've got, I think, what's a really interesting program for you today. We've commissioned research. Jenny will describe what the specifics of it are, but we're not here today to explain what GenAI is or tell you about the latest models. We're here to tell you what your peers in the market are doing with GenAI right now, today, and you can use it to gauge whether you think you're behind, ahead of the curve, how much of it's hype, what are the obstacles, what are people thinking about as the current use cases, and this is based on research that we just literally got out of the market over the last couple of weeks. So you're getting it about as fresh as you can possibly imagine. We haven't seen a lot of other research out there. So we do think what you're seeing today is some of the earliest research that's been done on the difference between what we're all doing on ChatGPT when we're sitting with our laptops and playing off to the side, and what companies are really doing in this day and age to incorporate GenAI into their content production workflows. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jenny Kelly, to start taking us through the research.
Awesome. Thanks, Todd. So as Todd mentioned, my name is Jenny Kelly. I run our content practice at Deloitte Digital, which, as you can imagine, is having also a huge impact by the changes in GenAI. So the research that he mentioned went to over 650 marketers to give us feedback, like he said, real data on what's happening. So to make this real, the first thing we want to note is that 26% of marketing leaders are currently reporting that they are already using GenAI in their workflow. But let's jump right to what's driving the demand in their marketing lifecycle. So it's no surprise to anyone that the world of marketing has changed and continues to keep changing. Currently, there's something around 500 million new pieces of marketing content that are created every day. And analysts predict double-digit growth in those numbers over the next 10 years. So marketing teams are responding to these changes in demand, figuring out how to produce higher volumes of content that's on average 54% more than the content that they needed to produce last year. And the stats, by the way, on that demand, they don't change based on how large your company is. The demand for content and getting the right content is something that all marketers are facing. But most companies are only able to meet demand about 55% of the time, because the ability to do this in a cost-effective, a timely way, but one that also feels really authentic and targeted to your brand, can be challenging. I said on the previous slide that it doesn't matter the size of your company for the increase in demand. I will say that the data shows that larger companies are able to meet the demand slightly higher than smaller companies are, but that in general, it is still a challenge. So what's driving this increased demand? There's a need for more effective content that can get to market faster. And we know that if you can do this the right way, it's going to lead to more loyalty or conversion or brand awareness, all the things that you can think of, the reason why you want to have more content in the market. And we also know there's more channels than ever to reach your audience. New ones popping up every day, and depends on what your audience segmentation is. As a brand, you may need to figure out how do you create the right strategy to then also have content on those channels and reach people where they want to be reached. And then there's also a shift happening that we're seeing over the past year or two, especially around brands who really want to know how do they manage their content. What are they sending to agencies versus what are they going to own by their in-house agency or their marketing team, or how are they really managing the distribution of who's doing what and what can be part of their agile marketing process. So I know Todd said we weren't going to explain what GenAI is. I am for 10 seconds.
Sort of.
Because I will say we talk to a lot of companies, and a lot of times they're not even using the elements of AI that they could to transform their work. So now we're at this place where they can use a lot of work around AI, predictive analytics, and partner that now with GenAI. And the difference between that is that GenAI is generating or creating the content in all these different formats, from simple text-based prompts. And we're seeing that being also a new job opportunity. It's around prompt engineering. So we know that the GenAI is going to dramatically change the way we work. There is no question that this is happening. It is already happening now, cost savings, time to market. But the journey will take time to really become integrated into your ways of working. We'll talk more about that at the end of this call, what it looks like to be ready and have this really give the impact that you're going to look for in your business. Over to you, Todd.
So back to this 26% number. So we're going to be able to be interactive here in two different ways today. First, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A. We'll try and answer a few of them during the call if we see some that we think are relevant to the whole group. So please feel free to put them in the Q&A. Second, we're going to start getting into some of the specifics now. We thought about how quickly folks are going to implement GenAI, but we thought before we share with you the number of beyond the 26% who are in it, who are using it right now, we'd run a poll and among the people who are on this call, get a sense of how many of you are planning to implement or are using GenAI right now. So Cynthia, if you could put the poll up, there you go. Oops, it's the other one. Try that again. There we go. So here's the question for all of you. I'd love to see how this group compares to what our 650 people we surveyed said. So have you implemented GenAI in marketing content, in your production? This isn't, have you played with it personally? This is, have you used it? Yes, you're using it, or are you planning to deploy later this year, which is only a couple of months left, in 24, in 25 or later, interested but no definite plans, or you don't have plans to use GenAI. So why don't you please, if you would submit, we'll give everybody just a moment or two to get their votes in. And there we go. So 43% of you say you've implemented it. That's actually, we're getting the live results. That's a little bit ahead of, you guys are early adopters relative to the folks that in our survey. The way our survey played out was I'm trying to compare the numbers live here. 18%, it was 26% who said they have it now. We're at 40% here, 18% in 2023. Now we're through a lot of 2023 right now, and this survey was done a little bit earlier. Another 20, we found 27% in 24, and this says 22. You guys are saying 22%, and a relatively smaller percent in 25, and then 23% say no definite plans and no plans to use GenAI. 1% in this group, 3% in our poll. So the poll results for you, for the people on this call, are pretty consistent with what we found in our survey. You guys are relatively representative. 18% plan to implement this year, beyond that 26%, and another 24% in 24. So let's get into some of the specific industries and use cases, because I think this is where the data is going to get real. As far as plans to adopt in 23, that is, are using it or plan to adopt in 23. It was interesting. Manufacturing came out the highest. Now we've debated a lot about why that could be. They tends to be industries that are very software driven. So that may be the case. Media and entertainment, publishing are naturally a place that GenAI falls. The technology one, interesting statistic, potentially underrepresented in the survey. We have certainly our questions about that one. All the others, a lot obviously in the low 20, mid to low 20s. why are marketers using Gen AI? A lot of the early adoption is, as you'll see on the next slide as well, is about improving content quality. It's about quality checking as opposed to origination, increasing the accessibility, grammar checking, and automating or accelerating. Those are the things that came out. As you see when you start getting into the specific use cases, and you'll see the channels coming up. The earliest use cases, I think, could be arguably the simplest use cases, which again makes some sense. Taking data and creating visualization and infographics, creating a simple graph, that's an obvious one. Images and visuals, long form text, captions, and headlines. Those are the ones that came out of the most common use of Gen AI. The least common uses were around audio, video, and all of those kinds of uses. There's a long way to go to implement Gen AI, even in content workflows today, in non-video, non-audio content. I think we could all argue that the video adoption is going to take even longer, and that showed up clearly in the survey results. Channels, well, it makes sense if you think about things like images and visuals and long-form texts. The channels that are being deployed for Gen AI also make a lot of sense. Using it to literally to build ads, whether it's banner ads, print ads, using Gen AI on social media and mobile apps and email. If you look at the other end, less about video platforms and less about press releases themselves. Press releases typically are filled with a lot of very specific company data. So while they can be used for grammar checking and quality checking, it still takes a human at this point to write the press release. And so there's other use cases, obviously, using sales materials, collaterals. We have plenty more data if you're interested to get in touch with us. And by the end of next year, the 650 people who ultimately participated in our survey expect that half of their content production will be touched by Gen AI. So that's how Gen AI is getting used. The next section is about the ROI, and I think these results were kind of interesting because it starts to give you a sense, and it's very early, but of what companies, how they're effectively monetizing, their view of how they're monetizing Gen AI. And this is a question for all of us in marketing that we have to deal with, because the natural question from the CFO is, all of these tools cost X amount, they all require an investment. What are we going to get back? And this is some of the first data that I'm aware of with regard to what the benefit has seen. Now, in terms of the qualitative benefits, the expectation on folks is again around quality of content, employee productivity, the volume of content produced. There's not a lot of folks, if you look at the graph at the bars on the right, who are using it to justify as lower cost of content production. Although if you think about lower cost relative to higher content produced, that's just flip sides of the same coin. I either have fewer people or the same number of people producing more content. Either one of those is another way to say efficiency. In terms of the efficiency itself, content marketing leaders estimate Gen AI saves employees 12.2 hours per week for those that are really embedded, what we call the high content maturity companies, 12.2 hours. So you could think of that as, if you're working for the week, 8 hours a day, you're effectively getting about another day and a half of productivity out of somebody who's using Gen AI to help their, produce content on behalf of their organization. And we asked companies to estimate what their ROI is. At this point, it's early, but the estimated ROI is 12%, which ultimately is going to have to improve to make GenAI the kind of get the ROI that will make heavy investments in GenAI make sense. Now, again, this is really early. We've spent a lot of time debating whether 12%, consider the fact that GenAI has been around for less than a year in terms of consciousness that all of us have. 12% could be considered strong if you're thinking of it in terms of less than a year that the technology has been implemented, but relative to other kinds of technology, they're going to be looking for an ROI that's higher than that eventually. So that's something about the benefits, where it's being used, and the ROI. Flip it back over to you, Jenny.
Awesome. Thanks, Todd. So let's talk about some of the challenges when you're thinking about implementing this into your business. And we're going to run another poll to check in on how our data is facing with your main obstacles. So when you think about this as a company, what would you say? And if there were multiple choice, I'm sure many of you would select multiple, but if you had to pick a primary, what would you say is a main obstacle for implementing it in your company? We'll just give a minute for you guys. I know there's a lot of choices there. Give it a minute for you to read through. Okay, so interesting. The highest result is lack of internal GenAI expertise, followed with a tie of governance issues and integrating the software with existing marketing system and workflows, with the last one around tech and solution readiness. So super interesting results. The broader one to go, let's see, I'm going to exit out of the poll and go to the next one and show you some of our data to compare how this is landing with what you're facing at a company. Is most of the responders that replied, and we know this is going to tie to a tech implementation, is securing budget to figure out how to either take existing technology that you have and know what the solutions are. We found a lot of companies reported what their existing tech stack was for how they do this today and want to know what are solutions that work with that, or do they have to look at a custom solution, or do they have to look at some other company and how do they integrate that into their current tech stack? That one popped up a lot. And then you can see the other highest one, which is pretty close to the same results of this poll, is around governance issues. Needing to figure out policies, the processes, the controls, what's ethical for how you're managing the setup of the model. And then next highest ones, and all of these you can see pretty close in terms of percentage, but enterprise readiness, what's their willingness to take on the risk of implementing a new tech, even with a reward, because we know, Todd talked about the ROI. Whenever you're integrating some new tech, you're going to have to do upfront investment and have a little bit of time before you start to see the ROI. We do know with this tech that ROI is going to grow over time, like with many of these strong innovation tech changes.
Yeah.
And then,
I was just going to add. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jenny.
No, please add.
Just going to add on the legal requirements. I think that is one that naturally ends up coming to the maybe towards the end of everybody's list. Yet, as we've dug deeper and deeper into it ourselves, there's so many unsettled issues around copyrights, IP, and all of those sorts of things. So it's so easy to produce Gen AI content, where it's really interesting is to deploy it. Very easy to talk in theory, especially with some of that legal stuff. Really adds a complicated factor.
Well, and thank you, tease up exactly the next slide. And I will say, when you're on the business and in the marketing org, when you're ready to implement tech like this, there's a lot of companies that we're working with that their legal team are the ones waving their hands and saying, like, hold on, we need to make sure that everything's okay first. There's these elements around, and if you get into the details, Todd and I could talk about these issues all day, I think. But there's debates around what's protected. Like when it's created by GenAI, how do you work it as a team? What's the human plus machine that still gives you protections? And you're gonna you're going to see different legal implications for when you're using it as just an accelerator to what you're doing versus if you're trying to have something that goes direct to consumer, or it's something that your company is going to need protection around what the development is. So working through those issues is definitely key when you think about the use cases of where to get started, and make sure that you're setting it up the right way. But it's for all of these things that we're saying, and I'm gonna give this caveat for this whole section, they're not reasons to not get started. Because if you think about this poll that you guys responded to, that your highest one is the expertise, you've got to start building it now, because the more that this goes, and other companies that are going to hire the expertise, I think there was the viral job posting for like 900,000 for a prompt engineer. You're going to have to start building the capability within your teams, and not think about it as taking away from marketers, but they're going to have to start implementing it into their ways of working. So there's ways around all these challenges. It's just considerations. The other two I want to hit on here are around trust. And we talked about this a little bit on the previous slide around, and you'll hear companies talk about responsible, ethical AI. So just for a second, want to hit on making sure that you're also considering a use case that doesn't impact any of the perception of your brand, doesn't impact trust about how you're interacting with it. I think we've even seen some companies, when they started doing influencers and had to come out with the requirement to say that this was a sponsored ad, we're already seeing some companies add clauses about when GenAI is a part of what they're doing. So we'll continue to see the evolution of how brands use this in their marketing, and especially with consumer facing. But then also employee trust, making sure that you're bringing your whole marketing teams along the journey of what this transformation really does look like, the impact to their ways of working, and how they think about managing the work, so that it doesn't bring up any concerns with your marketing org. Okay, so to this next one, how are the respondents to this survey actually doing it already? So the majority of companies we found in the results, and you can see the detailed answers, have policies, programs, and procedures in place. This was a lot of the first places ones that were ready to get started knew that this was a place that they had to start. So they needed the ability to have QA as part of their process. They need programs to train employees how to use it effectively. This one is so key. And we've seen some brands building programs from scratch that teach copywriters the right way how to use the tools, and prompt engineering. What are the guidelines? What's a legal plan? You can see the rest of the results, but you can definitely see in the respondents that that's a place where the majority of marketing orgs are starting. The next part that's really interesting, especially when you think about the technology and your existing tech stack and what's out there for a choice, is that about 4 in 10 that are saying that they're already using GenAI are primarily using proprietary models that they've developed internally. So the other respondents using existing and proprietary models equally, and then mostly using existing model, is a lot lower percentage than I expected. And I think we're going to see a balance of this in the future. It's going to be, as those big companies that are already managing it continue to roll out GenAI solutions, it's going to be an easier adoption versus having to build something custom or integrating into what that is. But for now, companies that want to be leaders and ahead of it are going to proprietary solutions. So we'll see a balance of this in the future. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the hype curve. This happens with any new tech that comes out. There's so much conversation about it. Is this real? Is this really going to change? Here's where the market is. A lot of pressure from businesses to say, how are you going to adopt this into your org? What does this look like? And the reality of what you want to do is try to avoid the hype curve. And we're working with a lot of companies on how can you get to the place where you have readiness figured out, you know how you're going to implement it, you understand your tech stack, and you're ready for it to actually be that building block to get started in what you're doing today. So a lot of the leaders in our organization, we are talking to global leaders every day. What are the use cases? How can they get started? What does this look like? What's everyone doing? What is tech ready, enterprise ready? And I will say that for the majority of them, they're not all the way ready for GenAI. And I don't mean to contradict those that are saying they're already doing it. My point more is when you think about the maturity model of what it takes to fully integrate the benefits of GenAI into your organization, there's more work that companies can do to figure out what that looks like. How they're handling their tech, what the integration looks like, how are they managing their data around their audience so that they can really get targeting to the right way. Are they using the capabilities of AI and predictive analytics to be ready for that counterbalance of what GenAI can really do? And to emphasize, again, it's not to say don't get started now. You need to. Every company should be thinking about the use cases that they can start to implement so that they build the skill sets within their company. They build the processes. They do all those building blocks so that they can really be ready for the transformation. And I will say that those that have identified themselves as marketing leaders, they're 14 times more likely than low content maturity companies to be using it. So just to put a finer point on it, figuring out what does maturity look like in this space to be fully ready to embrace the benefits that you'll get from GenAI. So we just have a few more slides to sum up the points of what we're saying. This will be transformational. There is no question. It is going to enable companies to do more personalization at scale. This something that has been such a prime target for a while now can now be more cost effective once you can figure out the tech implementation and the right use cases. And it will be a competitive advantage for those who get it figured out. I'm not going to go into all the detail on this slide other than to reemphasize some of the points that Todd and I have made throughout the presentation. There's a lot of things to figure out when you're thinking about the use case, and just to make sure you're taking into account training, legal, how you're managing your data. And there's analysis that you can do to make sure you've kind of got it figured out in those boxes, what readiness looks like. And then some additional stats that when we encourage companies to figure out the use case, to figure out a pilot, and be able to report back to the business the real benefits to make sure that you're investing in the right tech solutions. We have some stats around copy generation as a very typical use case because we know that enterprises, the tech is enterprise ready. A 200% increase in writer capacity when they're using GenAI tools for content creation. At least a 67% decrease in time spent on manual design tasks. So you think about the image cleanup, image generation, all of the things that you can do that really accelerate your work. And then Todd mentioned the time savings that you can see per week. And then these are finally the reported benefits for companies that are expecting to receive from using GenAI, both from the customer facing, what they expect when they implement it, and then within their marketing organization. So I know I went through those last slides fairly quickly. We have about a minute left. Todd, anything that you want to add at the end?
2 points. First of all, there's a question from Michelle asking about sort of time of implementation. And I think, we didn't specifically ask about that, but I think it's natural to assume that that's back to the somewhat intertwined with the ROI question. It's going to take, those ROI numbers aren't overwhelming. So I think everybody who's adopting early has to invest some amount of time into it. And I also don't think this is one of these things that it's done. So I think it's going to be kind of on a curve. But given that the technology in broad use is less than a year old, a little bit hard to judge that. The other thing I will point out is I think, everybody's question ultimately is, are the robots going to take over the world? And one of the things I read and I've heard and learned is that ultimately, if you have two Gen AI models talking to each other without a human in there, eventually those models will collapse. They will become useless and produce gobbledygook. So for ultimately, it's going to take all of us guiding this technology to get the best use out of it. So I view the role of marketers as more important than ever, but hopefully stronger than ever by having the availability of this technology for us. Any other questions? Yeah. Sample size was 650 people. We tried to do it across industries. Thank you for that question, Juliet. Any other questions? Great.
We have one more question for you both, and I will just go ahead and ask it. What are some ways to prove the worth of Gen AI for content production to leadership?
That's a great question. One of the best ways that we found is to run it in a parallel, like shadow path almost. So run a use case the way you typically would. I'll use an email marketing process as an example that's consumer facing. So however you would typically do an email campaign targeted to your customer, run a proof of concept with Gen AI so that you can provide the direct comparison. This took 3 weeks, the typical process, X amount of dollars. With Gen AI, we cut about 5 working days off of it. And this was the difference. That's what we've seen is going to be one of the easiest ways to do it. If you don't already have pre-existing data, run them in parallel.
Okay.
So a question about use in regulated industries. The regulated industries came out as much lower on adopting Gen AI. Definitely, their plans were, everybody's plans were to adopt it, but the regulated industries definitely were showing longer implementation times than the unregulated industries.
But there are fascinating, like, and you think in life science, healthcare, we've seen some of those companies really do some work on where Gen AI can start to solve those problems, because that is a expensive and time intensive process for many of them. So I think that's a big use case that a lot of them are looking at tackling first.
We have a question from Melanie. I'm going to read it out for you. I'm curious how marketers are judging the quality of content from Gen AI.
Good question. Jenny, how would you answer that?
One of the key things we emphasize when we work with the marketing orgs is that Gen AI is not a standalone solution. It's most effective when you're partnering it with your creative teams. So if you really think about it more as an accelerator instead of a replacement, the quality of what you're getting, and we've run comparisons on it where we've had, again, that same shadow thing. We've had a team do the work, and then we've done it by Gen AI to allow teams to start to compare the differences. And when is it worth the cost savings of the accelerator versus the normal way of doing it? I'll say the quality of some of the tech solutions is equal what you would see normally. For some of them, it's still growing in the quality of the initial output, but I'd always still partner it with your creative teams or with your marketing teams to guarantee better quality. But you see it as an accelerator.
Somebody asked about tools. We're not going to publish the specifics on it, but the tools that came out in sort of the order of the most, no surprises, the ones that are being used earliest are Firefly from Adobe, ChatGPT, Canva AI, DALL-E, Google Bard, Word.ai, Write Sonic, Capterra. Those are some of the ones that came out early in our in the research. There are plenty of others.
And I'll add to that, Todd. For every use case, like if you're thinking about, I want to start with text generation. For every use case, there's the top 3 tools, for example, and like we talked about before, what works with your existing systems versus what's an add-on, and how easy can this actually integrate into your ways of working? Because a lot of those are really comparative for how good the results are.
All right. Another question, why start to integrate Gen AI now versus waiting to see how other companies are utilizing the tech?
Do you want to be the guinea pig or the early adopter? It's a good question. Jenny, you want to take a whack at that one?
Yeah. So I think we're seeing that hesitancy between a lot of companies we're talking to. Do they want to be the leader and, like Todd said, the guinea pig, where they're trying to figure out the tech and some of the bumps along the road? Do they want to be the fast follow or even the slow follow? And I'll say those that are going to be the leaders in starting now and even finding some small use cases to figure it out, you guys even gave this as a poll, lack of expertise around Gen AI. The sooner that you're implementing something now, the more you're going to be ahead of the competition as everyone else starts to develop this. Like, you've got to start the building blocks of your policies, your governance, the training of your people, because there is no question that it will be a competitive advantage and that your competitors are going to get there. You just have to decide as a company, like, the risk reward of starting now and how far ahead are you going to get from competition. You have to figure it out on a
couple other questions that came in. One about copyright security, hugely unsettled area of law right now. You can't ensure copyright security, which is one of the big challenges with Gen AI, and there's a lot of writing out there. That's something I encourage you to read about. And was any Gen AI used in the service of today's presentation? No, we put this together the good old-fashioned way. PowerPoint slides. Great questions. Thanks, everybody, for joining today.
All right, well, if that's it, we will wrap today's webinar. I want to take some time to thank everyone in our audience for attending and let them know if we didn't get to their questions, we'll pass it along to Deloitte Digital. And on behalf of Martech, I want to thank you all for attending, and we hope you see you again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.